This conversation is about the biology of taste, and it's structured to give us some greater insight in the wine that we are tasting. Um, and This is the first time I've ever run this presentation, so stick with me. Um, Strictly speaking, when you talk about taste, all of your tastes come through your taste buds. And your taste buds have great capacity. There are some people called super tasters that have twice as many taste buds. But basically, what's important to understand is that it's also a limited number of tastes. And I could claim that the tastes that you can biologically respond to are those tastes that managed to keep the hunter gatherers alive 30,000 years ago. For instance, if you take sweet or sugars in general, it's really the most elemental of taste pleasures. Sweetness signifies the presence of sugars, which are the foundation of the food chain and energy. So they're essential survival for the hunter-gatherer to be able to distinguish sweet and sugars. Sour, that mouth-puckering sensation called by acids in lemon, yogurt, sourdough bread, etc. Scientists suspect that sourness originally signaled that food was decomposing and was potentially unsafe to eat. So these are basic, necessary human tastes through your buds. Bitter. Bitter is a poison alarm. Bitterness is a distinctive bad taste accompanied by a reflexive yuck expression on the face, as this woman is demonstrating. Hundreds of substances, mostly found in plants, taste bitter, but at the same time, a little bitterness makes food interesting and really quite healthy. Uh, Salt is another basic taste. I might add that if tonight you taste salt in your wine, that's a problem. But your capacity to taste is covers salt, and our brains are programmed so that a little salt tastes good and a lot tastes bad. There's one final taste that didn't appear on the screen for a number of years. That's umami, which is Japanese for delicious taste. And umami is produced by amino acids, and it's best described as a savory taste rich in taste released by cooking, curing, or aging. Uh, my suspicion is that umami was important for hunter-gatherers because on the occasion when they did take down a mastodon and wanted to cook up some meat, the savory taste would support that grilling of the meat and preserving of the meat for more time over time. Now, how does this relate to wines? It was actually in 1983 when Émile Peynaud, a famous Bordeaux enologist, wrote a book called Le Goût du Vin. It's appropriately ostentatious, The Taste of Wine. I got a copy, and in that ancient text, he described the triangle of taste in wines as being um, sweetness from the grape and sweetness also from the alcohol, acidity from the natural acids that are in the grape and some that are produced during the fermentation, and tannins which come out of the grape skins and seeds and typically during winemaking and maceration. And the reason I find this useful is that it provides a very basic structure for assessing a wine. You can try and get flowery language in your glass, but basically, if you think, what are the tannins like? What's the level of acidity? Does the acidity balance the sweetness? The diagnostic of the wine in terms of three components are actually pretty easy to figure out. I've been teaching some wine seminars to undergraduates at Harvard for the last 26 years. And what I point out is that just with this triangle alone, you can hold your own with a sommelier when they pour the wine and you say, well, I like the freshness of the acidity, I think it comes across really well and it balances the sweetness of this grape. But I have to say, in tasting the tannins, they're a little rough and coarse. I think this wine may be a little young for us tonight, so we're going to send it back and order another bottle. You get the
Right.
sense of how just those three dimensions of taste can be very useful and can lead you to not only an appreciation, but a diagnostic. Now, I'm going to try and adjust something on my screen here. Maybe not. Taste buds on your tongue have receptors, and uh, they're located in the little small structures like papillae, called papillae on the upper surface of the tongue and the palate and the esophagus. And these little structures are involved in distinguishing the five elements of salty, sour, bitter, sweet, and umami. There's a popular myth that assigns these different tastes to different regions of the tongue, but that's not actually correct. In reality, these five different tastes can be tasted by any one of your taste buds in any location. And so they each have the capacity of interpreting um, the food that's been dissolved in saliva when they come into contact with these receptors. The taste receptor cells send information detected by the clusters to various receptors and ion channels of the gustatory areas of the brain. Now, you don't need to memorize this to appreciate the fact that we have sensitive and useful taste buds. So, what about aromas versus taste? Clearly, your nose is involved in some of this process, and in fact, the wide array of fruit and earthy and floral and wood flavors present in wine are all derived from notes that are sensed by your olfactory bulb, which is right just above your nasal cavity. Um, it's a special sense of smell that comes from odors perceived, and it occurs when an odor itself binds to a receptor within the nasal cavity, transmitting a signal through the whole olfactory system. Now, please, please don't worry. This is the only chemical structure or molecule that is in this presentation. So it's not, I have not transported you to Phi 2, but just want to point out that these are simple and yet fairly complicated structures that can be formed a number of different ways. It's derived from an acid and typically have a low molecular weight, which is used in fragrances and found in essential oils. So esters are all around us in different fragrances. I mean, people who design perfumes and are known as really tasters and noses, if you will, they can distinguish between 2,000 and 5,000 different aromas and different esters in the process. Tonight, we're going to work on maybe three or four. The two most important factors affecting the formation of these esters are the yeast strain itself and the fermentation temperature. Different strains yield different quantities of esters. Fermentation temperature um, determines the quantity and the type of esters produced. So a winemaker who wants to create high ester wines will usually use a very aromatic yeast, clarify the must, and then ferment the wine as a cold temperature as the yeast can tolerate. So fruity aromas are generally associated with esters that are not produced at warmer temperatures. Enologists would say lower temperatures, the 50s, give you more tropical fruit smelling esters, banana, fruit cocktail. When you get into the 70s, the esters become much more floral. So that's basically what's happening here. If you got some chemical reactions themselves that produce different organic esters, these esters throw off, or if you will, interact with your olfactory system to define different flavors. And then the question is, what do we call those flavors? And how do I taste how do I taste as a taster? For this, I'm going to take a 30-second sideline into the interception between perception and language. When I was a boy in southern Mexico with my father, the anthropologist, I was testing one of my friends, one of my Tzotzil Mayan friends, as to what the languages they use to name different colors. And I took out different swaths of cloth and was using them. And I put blue down, and he said Yosh. And I put green down, and he said Yosh. I came back to blue, he said Yosh. And I discovered empirically that basically the fact that they only have one word for blue and green keeps them from seeing the distinction. On the other end, the Inuit have dozens of words for snow. And why is that? Well, different snows are really, really important to the Inuit for survival. I'll give you just a sample of that lexicon. Here are about 30 of the over 100 words that the Inuits use to describe different kind of snow. And you can understand that these distinctions can keep you alive if you notice correctly. And it also keeps you healthy because you at the bottom is puntla, which is a mouthful of snow because you fibbed, and kinaya, snow mixed with husky shit. And I don't think you want to get those two mixed up in the process of your hunting party. In the area of wine, what has become very popular in the last 20 years or so are called aroma wheels. And what these wheels do is to give you suggestions for what you might be smelling. The categories, as you see, are flower, citrus, tree fruit, tropical fruit, red fruit, black fruit, dried fruit. And you will find that if you read some of these descriptors, then that might show up in your taste. Or when you're tasting with someone else and they say, oh, this wine has a nice leather in it, then all of a sudden you can indeed smell, taste, have the aroma of leather. So the connection between language and perception is key, and it's doubly key in wine. What I want to say is that if you think people are using flowery words and making up descriptors of wine, what they're actually doing is trying to reach and stretch their understanding and their perception by using words that strive to communicate what it is they're tasting. So as we go into these Italian wines, you might want to think about some of the, particularly the red fruit, black fruit, and dried fruit descriptors as we taste the southern Italian wines. Italy, large country, 4 wine areas, 20 wine regions. The short story of the genesis of wine in Italy is that the birthplace of wine in the world is in the foothills of the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia. So what you had historically, and this goes back 8,000 years ago, are the varietal Vitis vinifera grew wild in Georgia, and the natives figured out how to stomp on it and then put it in big earthen jars, bury it in the ground to keep it cool while it ferments, and then have a pretty enjoyable cocktail. The wine found its way from Georgia down through the Fertile Crescent and over to the west to Phoenicia. And you can guess what happened after that. The migration of wine accelerated from Phoenicia to Greece to Italy, on into France, into Spain, into Germany, etc. And what's interesting is to ask, I think, what are the boundaries of where the wine can go? What determines, what all these regions have in common? And I like to refer to wine latitudes. It turns out that 30 to 50 degrees north latitude and 30 to 50 degrees south latitude are the bands where the weather in the world can produce wine, effective wine, and ripe grapes, etc. So if you look at that in general, this explains wine's rich history in Greece and France, and latitude was also the invitation for Spanish priests to plant vines in California. And since Mother Nature cannot distinguish between north latitude and south, this was the opening for Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, and South Africa. Now, when you come to Italy, it's a pretty remarkably well-designed country for wine. First of all, it spans from 37 degrees north in Sicily to 46 degrees north in Piedmont. And so there's this great 1,200-mile stretch with a seacoast on either side to moderate the weather, with a mountain chain, a spine down the central of Italy to provide some amount of weather and rain, and major rivers that traverse Italy um, every 100 miles or so. So our focus this evening is going to be on southern Italy, as I said, notably Puglia and Sicily and Sardinia. Um, there are very few countries in the world with as long or as illustrious a history claimed by Italy. The grapes were first being grown and cultivated on Italian soil 7,000 years, several thousand years ago by the Greeks and the Phoenicians, the Greeks who named it Onotria, the land of wine, and impressed with the climate and suitability of the soil for wine production. Since Roman times, a vast amount of Italian land has remained primarily for vine cultivation, and thousands of wineries are there to this day. If we take a longer perspective, like Henry would have us do, to look more at the cultures and the history and the trends, you basically had four different civilizations that contributed to the flourishing of wine on the Italian peninsula. Phoenicians were the first and the oldest, and carried wine cuttings around the entire Mediterranean. The Greeks were obviously highly skilled and developed in science and math and the arts and philosophy, and really appreciated wine. And the Greek wine was known as was legendary, even in Rome. The Etruscans brought over some winemaking technology from the Caucasus. They were only there in force for 250 years, but to them we owe great thanks. And of course, the Romans. Not only the Romans exist for a long period of time, but they tended to take cuttings with them wherever they went. Partly motivated by the fact that if you took a Roman legion into Gaul and you didn't have any wine, then the water would make everyone sick, and you would lose two-thirds of your forces to dysentery. So for the Romans, it was part of a military strategy, really moving around the world. So one other factor, I mentioned latitude, long shoreline, extensive mountains. And the fourth factor that makes Italy quite unique is that everybody's grandfather makes wine at home. So you have the potential for a wide, diverse number of wine types. I think there are 377 grapes being grown today in Italy. And some of that is preserved by the families themselves, because we all have a grandfather making wine with this particular area, with this particular grape, and preserving the traditions and preserving the tastes. These are the routes that the Phoenicians traveled in their cuttings and moving wines around the whole organization, making it all the way to the island of Majorca. The Greeks were phenomenal, and Greece is really the oldest wine producing regions of the world, among the first wine producing territories in Europe. The earliest evidence of Greek wine has been dated to 6,500 years ago, where wine was produced on a household or communal basis, your grandfather. And Greek wine had especially high prestige in Italy during the Roman Empire. But we have to tip our hats to the Greeks, who really were the first to recognize the major potential for wine in Italy. After settling in present-day Sicily and southern Italy, the Greeks were so impressed with the fertile land that they decided to import wines and give the name Onotria to the whole area of Italy. If you look today at the different grape varietals under cultivation in Italy, you can see the extremes. 1,500 hectares for Pericone, which we're going to taste tonight, up to 69, 70,000 hectares of Sangiovese, which is the base grape for Chianti and widely planted throughout Italy. Now, here's what we're going to do is take some of my encouragements about tannins, sugars, and acids, and that triangle of wine tasting, and apply it to several wines in process. And these wines will be gracefully presented to you by your classmates. So they'll present the grape, then we'll all taste that grape together and see what's there, and then move to the next grape. If you're a professional, which I am, you may actually spit rather than swallow. Or maybe I'll swallow. In any case. So we're up with the first grape, Negro Amaro. And I want to say a couple things about tasting Italian grapes. First, it's important to say the name. So repeat after me. Negro Amaro.
Negro Amaro.
Pretty good. Pretty good. And when we do the tasting, I'm going to urge you to not use like wine number 3 or wine number 4, but use the name of the grape itself, because that's gonna trigger your memory a lot more effectively. So we're going to taste the Negro Amaro, and then we're going to taste Nerello Mascalese.
Nerello Mascalese.
That's not fair, Lou. You're from the area. Then we're going to taste, say after me, Monica di Sardegna.
Monica di Sardegna.
Excellent. And then Dan Clement's going to lead us into Nero di Troia.
Nero di Troia.
Excelente, maravilloso. John McLaughlin is going to take us to Nero d'Avola.
Nero d'Avola.
Excellent. And Henry Sayre is going to anchor this relay with Perricone.
Perricone.
Okay, good.
Eric, if I just might ask you a question. Nero, in Greek, water is nero.
I think this is Italian, and it's mostly means black.
Means black, okay. I was going to ask you.
Yeah, red and white grapes, and as other people talk in the field talk about black and white grapes. So these are some of the black grapes of southern Italy. We're ready for Jay Riley to introduce us to Negro Amaro and lead the tasting of that varietal.
First of all, many thanks, Eric. You and Henry have done a great job. The mere fact that I'm trying to live up to your introduction is impossible. Negro Amaro is from Puglia, also known as Apulia in the English language. One of the ways to think of Apulia is it's the Appian Way out of Rome going to Brindisi. I guess this is the way the wine came in the reverse from Brindisi via the Greeks. The region is indeed the heel of southern Italy's boot, and Salento, the extension of the Negro Amaro del Salento, is the actual peninsula that is the heel that sticks down towards Corfu and Greece. The grape Negro Amaro is grown almost exclusively in Apulia, and Negro Amaro, as we just learned, means black, and some people think the Maro means bitter. I would suggest tasting this wine that I couldn't find too much bitter, but maybe that's my taste buds. But the key is this is a very dark colored wine. And according to one source, Negro Amaro is the guilty secret of Apulia, in that these wines are often shipped quietly north to beef up the less ripe produce of more famous vineyards in Italy and southern France. The vineyard is Vaglione. It's celebrating its 100th birthday this year. Next time you're in the area, you can visit their winery in Leporano. And I think it's a delicious wine. I've probably bought and consumed 8 bottles since we first tasted it in January.
You're just making sure.
$8 a bottle. This baby is priced to go. You better load up because it corner the market. and it'll raise the price. That's from a guy in the investment business, not the wine tasting business. End of discussion.
What did you say the price was?
$10 a bottle, something like that.
Jeez.
So here's to you.
Great. So I'm going to invite anyone to comment on the balance of the triangle here in this wine between the tannins and the sweetness and the acids.
Seems to be a fair amount of sweetness in it, I think.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that's from?
Maybe the heat in that part of Italy, very south. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think what's really interesting to me when we started to explore these Southern Italian wines 6 months ago, we've done a lot of work prior to this, is that when you're that far south in Italy, these grapes are ripe. There's no question about it. It's really delicious, full, fruity, ripe grapes, and I think that's contributing a component of the sweetness. What, in terms of aromas, can you find in this? And if I just trigger that question by saying, is it predominantly red fruits or black fruits, in your opinion?
Black
What's that?
cherry.
Black
fruit.
cherry?
Yeah.
I think that the black cherry, or the cassis, the French would say.
Mm.
I think that I found some of that in it as well. What else did you find?
I had said here peach, but that seems like an odd flavor, but it does have peach notes to me.
Yeah, I totally understand that, because if you strip away the dark fruit in your mind's eye, then there is that underlying sweetness that could be characterized as peach. Nice call. And the critical question, of course, would you actually spend $10 for a bottle of this wine?
Absolutely.
I think all of us, including Jay, have been going long on the Negro Amaro over the last several months.
It was a terrific surprise.
We wiped out the two under 2015. They're on to 2016, I think now.
Okay, let's move to the second grape varietal, which you recall is the Nerero Mascalese. And Rick, I see you're here. Do you need me to put up your slides, or can you do that?
Well, let me make one try at it. And if that fails, I'll ask you to do the honors for me, Eric.
Okay.
Did the varsity wine tasters here recommend these wines themselves, or were they collected by someone and each one asked to talk about one?
Well, as Eric's trying to help me out, I'll weigh in. And we benefited from Eric guiding us through a hard boot camp of monthly tastings, in which we went through 6 or 8 different wines at each one, and culled out the ones we thought were unacceptable for our classmates, and narrowed in on the ultimately on the 6 that we're drinking tonight.
So to answer your question, these have been highly tested and selected, 3 different rounds of intensive tasting, and we probably ruled out about 15 other wines that you won't even get exposed to tonight.
Yeah.
There
was hard work.
Oh yeah. There were a couple bottles that I actually threw away.
Eric is much louder or softer than
A wife.
I'm right here.
All right, I'm going to jump into this presentation with thanks to Eric for orchestrating this whole adventure. I'm currently attending my daughter's graduation from business school, and this was the only event that could pry me loose from those festivities to catch up with you guys. And I'm pleased to be part of it. And thanks to Eric for setting the stage. So Nerello Mascalese from Sicily is, as you know from some of the earlier discussion, Nerello is basically black-skinned grape from Muscale. It's by far not the most predominant grape varietal grown in Italy. Eric's little display of some of the 370 varieties shows it as pretty modest production, but it's got its niche within Sicily. And could we move the next slide? Sicily's got 23 designated wine subregions within the collection that Eric discussed as being across Italy, one of which is Mount Etna on the eastern side of the island of Sicily. And it's kind of that crescent-shaped wine region that goes around certain elevations on the volcanic mountain of Mount Etna. And that's where Nerello Mascalese has come to thrive and sort of come into its own as a pretty significant grape making some interesting wines. Within Sicily, there's actually a very long documented evidence of a long winemaking tradition. Going back to 4000 BC, there's some indication of wine having been made from wild grapes there. Later on, as Eric mentioned, the Greek occupation brought a combination of cultivation, pruning, and specialized winemaking equipment, which contributed greatly to a flourishing wine practice that continues to today. In the modern era, that was challenged a bit when viniculture, along with agricultural generally, faded in Sicily in the aftermath of World War II as farmers moved to cities in pursuit of industrial employment. Fortunately for our wine drinking amusement, that was reversed somewhat with a revival starting in the late 20th century as more interest got paid to local wine cultures and varietals and increased attention to quality in places like Sicily.
I like this.
Nerello Mascalese is one of over the 300 varieties authorized for production in Italy. It's typically harvested late, has a dark color. It's thought to have some distant relation to Sangiovese. And as I said, although it's not broadly grown in Italy, it's the second most common red wine varietal grown in Sicily, with production concentrated on the slopes of Mount Etna at about 2,000 feet plus or minus elevation. There we have Mount Etna. So it's probably not grown up there in the snowfields, but a little bit below that, where it gets some cooling benefit from, despite being in a quite southern part of the Italian wine growing regions. And last slide. Our wine comes from a producer who's Tenuta Masseria Setaporte. Tenuta is basically an estate. Masseria, a fortified farmhouse, and there are a number of those in Sicily, many of them dating from the 16th century. And Setaporte is 7 doors. So that sort of describes the physical layout of, at least historical physical layout of the operation producing this. This particular winemaker is situated on the southwest side of Mount Etna, so really down around the bend of the curve of that wine-making region. There's a long tradition at this site. I don't know how far back it goes. Its modern significance really dates to the 1970s when the current owners, the Portale family, acquired the vineyard and the buildings around supporting it. They expanded the operation to today around 40 acres of vineyards, growing primarily Nerello Mascalese, but a small quantity of Nerello Cappuccio as well for blending. And there's a little bit of that in this wine, with the aim of producing elegant aromatic wines. And to my taste, this wine does come out as both aromatic. Elegant may be a stretch. I find it a little bit more robust, but it has, I think, a nice balance between the sweetness, which I taste as being more musty than I would characterize as either red or dark fruits, and pretty much a good balance of acidity to go with that. So with that, welcome other comments.
Yeah, I found it, the nose is really interesting to me. It's almost like wild boar spaghetti.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what you meant, I think, by musty. But
yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's definitely earthy.
It's like I'm eating as good a spaghetti as I could ever, bolognese as I could ever eat, except it's in my nose. So
do you think there's any of that husky horse shit that
might be? Yeah,
that we got to be aware of in the snow?
Yeah, something like that.
I thought of barnyard.
Yeah, right.
Barnyard, yeah, and walnut.
Yeah,
Kind of mushroomy, walnutty,
a lot of mushroom.
earthy, and much higher in tannins than the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, way
Yes,
higher tannins.
Yeah.
Other than wild boar, what I was really thinking of is morels.
Yeah. Mushrooms, yeah.
Yeah.
Or else.
There's a great opportunity here to compare this Nerello Mascalese with the Negro Amaro, which it should be right next to it. And let me just suggest, without giving you the answer, let me just suggest that you might look at the combination of both the color differences and the differences in tannins. And the simple way you can recognize that a wine is more tannic is that it sort of increases the friction between your tongue and your palate. So it makes everything sort of stick together. And those are the tannins operating on your tongue. But compare the two and see what observations you might have.
It's like going from a rosé to a red. It's it's the one's so fruit forward, and the other's so much more tannic.
Right.
It's night and day.
Yeah. All right. Let me take a crack at my grape, which is Monica di Sardegna. The Monica grape is grown only in Sardinia. So this goes back, like everything else, hundreds of years, and makes a tasty wine that is still fairly alcoholic. This is 14% alcohol by volume. Sardinia, as you probably know, is the second largest Italian island after Sicily, and is situated in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The Greeks called it Hyknusa, from the Greek ichnos, or the footprint of the human foot, which the island itself seems to emulate. I guess that's the big toe up there on the left. Sardinia, however, takes its name from the Latin Sardinia, as the Romans called it typically, historically. The Monica is a grape variety found exclusively on the island of Sardinia off the west coast of Italy, despite its relatively unknown status. It is one of the island's most common varieties and makes simple wines designed for everyday drinking. Its cultivation goes back to the 11th century, when the Camaldolese monks began to plant vines and make wine. It's a fruitful wine, mid-ripening, good resistance to spring frost and powdery mildew. 2,900 hectares under cultivation in Sardinia. The terroir for Monica in most of the island is a combination of clay and limestone. They're not really big pebbles like you'd find in Bordeaux, but it is a consistent and attractive um, clay. And clay tends to retain water better than other terroirs, and therefore, for a southern exposure like this, it's an excellent way of preserving the freshness during the hot summer. I was intrigued with this when I tasted it, and my comments were to say it's a light cherry red, bright fruit with red cherries and some lilac. On the palate, there's strawberries and blackberries and raisins. Fresh, clean acidity and smooth tannins, I think you'll find. Finish goes on 1 or 2 minutes, lingering with cherries. So grab your Monica di Sardegna and have a taste.
This is the kind of wine I would drink for dinner all summer.
Very fruity. Yeah.
A lot of fruit.
Yep.
Really pleasant to drink.
Yep.
Soft tannins.
Yeah, I mean the fruit. Yeah, the fruit's balanced enough with tannin and acid, but the fruit is what speaks to you. Yeah.
When I first touched the glass to my nose, I wrote down smoky, an ash kind of
Oh,
smoky.
you're right.
Is that what you?
That's right.
Anybody got that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I hadn't found that. Which fits.
I was impressed when I first tried it with the color. I mean, the color you could almost mistake for a Burgundy Pinot Noir. It's so light red.
Yeah.
And I think it speaks to why it's available young and fresh, and that color reflecting sort of the lack of heavy tannins or sediments.
The summer wine for sure.
Yeah.
It's very easy to drink. It's very smooth.
It's almost too easy to drink.
Yeah. Might be.
More.
Might be.
That's why we provided a full bottle of each grape varietal.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have the latitude. Kirby, how are you and your daughter doing?
There you go.
I got my wife, I got my daughter, and I got 4 dogs in the room. But they don't get any of the wine.
I'm here to help with the Zoom and the muting and unmuting.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank God you're there.
Really?
He also
all
has
use
a
them.
wine collection though.
I've been spending like 15, 16, 20 more dollars for junk wine that doesn't taste anywhere near this good. So this is like a real revelation. But I never see these wines in the store. So I would order them from Sarasota Wine Company, but where would you find these wines? How come we don't see these wines? What's going on?
Kirby, I've found the 12 Mezzo, the first wine we drank, almost everywhere in this state and in Washington State, because my kids live up in Seattle. So I go up there fairly often. And the 12 Mezzo, which is a real identifiable bottle with that checkerboard thing on it, is really available. It's almost always on the bottom shelf of every wine thing because it's only $11. But you can find it.
And also, I'm a total Seahawks fan. I'm one of the 12. So
The last standing.
I was surprised to find a whole like big column in the stores, several racks of just Sicilian and Pulian wine. I never paid attention to them before, so I thought that was interesting to even find them, but they're out there.
Well, the truth is that nobody was selling them in the United States, distributing them outside of Southern Italy until the late 1970s. And so they have a real catch-up game to do. And the DOC Sicilia is a completely organic DOC, which is really interesting. So that they're trying to capture the entire organic wine industry out of Southern Italy and bring that into the United States. And they've been doing it with increasing success. One of their biggest problems is that France won't let them in. There's, and you know those, and that's your reputation.
Nero d'Avola is pretty easy to find.
Yeah, it is.
From what I found.
Yeah.
As is Primitivo, which is something that we haven't tried tonight.
They both are. Nero d'Avola is by far the largest wine produced down there. Yeah. And what's interesting is that so many of those wines we're tasting, we really found because they were cheap because nobody's ever heard of them.
Mm-hmm. I think we're all benefiting from the fact that while they were really fading after World War II, from the emigration of the farmers to the industrial economy, we just got the wind in our backs soon enough to start to bring these back into to capture the tradition, and then start to emphasize quality and distribution to get them to us while they were on the upswing and before anybody recognized them to make them expensive. But it won't last.
Well, it might last our lifetimes.
That's right. One of the benefits of being old.
Yeah, right.
And Clement is on deck.
In your tasting, were there some that sounds like not all Southern Italian wines were great?
That's right.
You could say that again.
You've selected some for us, right?
Yeah.
Were there some of them that you might pass on, is what I'm hearing.
We tried hundreds of them. Hundreds.
Well, actually, Dan tried hundreds of them on his own. But
we just want you to know that your varsity tasting team has been working for you.
I want to know if Tracy's bar is in his home.
This is a virtual background. It's the Exeter Inn.
Oh, that's great.
And do you want to take us into Nero di Troia, please?
Sure. My wife Jude is here with me, and
Jude, get in the picture.
Hi.
Hi, Jude.
we live in our own part of the wine country here in the Central Coast, and really love what we've got here. But it's been fun branching out into Southern Italian wine. So Nero di Troia is the third most important native black grape in Puglia, after and it's black, after Negro Amaro, which we already tasted thanks to Jay, which between you and me, as a result of the competition, was by far the best in show from my standpoint. But these others are coming on strong today. It's I'll have to keep drinking, withhold judgment. And then the Primitivo, which is, I guess, one of you, maybe it was Dick Bear, and somebody mentioned is also a good seller, but I don't think we're tasting. But those two are more popular than Nero di Troia. They're all three of them are grown in Puglia, and the Nero di Troia represents less than 1% of the production on Eric's slide near the beginning. So it's a little teeny sliver of what Italy is putting together. It develops much later in the year than Nero Amaro and Primitivo, and hence the color is more intense. And they say the tannins are a bit softer. I'm not sure that's right, but that's what Google brings to you. So take it for what it's worth. This particular vineyard, Vogt Romano, I don't know if you can see it, but you got it. It's all black with white letters, a very elegant label. It's about 2,000 feet, which I think is kind of the same elevation as Rick Smith's Mount Etna location. And it's only about 9 acres large. And the write-up is that it is typically fairly astringent and therefore frequently blended with other grapes. And it's common in that area, at least in the past. They're apparently getting their techniques much better honed. So they're starting to make wine solely out of the Nero di Troia. But it's been common in the past to grow Montepulciano grapes in between the Nero di Troia grapes in the same vineyard, maybe 2 or 3 to 1, and then blend the two. So when I heard about this blending, it was a slight red flag to me, and brought back possibility back to Exeter days. Those of you who were in the Glee Club or hung out at the music building at all knew who Artie Landers was. And just imagine you're going to your first Glee Club experience. Artie Landers is there. He listens to your voice. And he says, you know, Dan, your voice is great, but I think it would sound better in a large group. So that was the message coming through in terms of what I read about the grape. But I must admit, today, I opened up the bottles right after our first session today. So they've been open 3 to 4 hours, and they all taste much better than I remember them tasting when we went through them as a wine team, but that might have just been because we were drinking so many of them. But anyway, so here's what's written in the literature about this particular grape, the wine made out of it. An elegant bouquet of cherry, black currant, black pepper, tobacco, and greenery, whatever that is. That sounds a little bit like the husky shit to me, but I don't know. Strikingly silky feel on the palate, containing plenty of well-balanced acidity and noticeable but refined tannins. So I taste a little bit of fruit and some tannins in this, and I invite you to give it a taste and tell us what you think.
I'm thinking, Dan, that the greenery may be the shrubbery from Monty Python.
Yes, bring me a shrubbery.
I jotted down woody or cherry. It's like if you had a fresh cut piece of cherry and smelled the wood. That's what I sensed with my nose anyway.
George Washington.
No.
You know, there's only certain things I would ever drink this wine with, but I would drink it with duck.
Mm.
And it's and probably with a fruity duck. Because it would balance. It's a little sharp to me.
It has plenty of acid.
Yeah, it has plenty of acid.
Yeah, but the fruit's strong too. Fortunately,
yeah, it is. Yeah,
yeah, it blends well, as Jude says.
Hey, this is Neil. The bottle, we couldn't find the exact label, but the bottle we bought, which is called Damati, is a blend of 84% of Nero di Troia and 14% Primitivo. So,
all right,
it's a blend. It's mostly this grape, but it's got 16 or whatever percent of Primitivo in it.
What they're doing is they're doing the Primitivo to soften the tannins.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Like the Montepulciano.
What not everybody knows about Primitivo is that it's the same grape as Zinfandel.
Yeah. In fact, Zinfandel was introduced from Primitivo stock from Croatia, I think. Isn't that right, Eric?
Started in Croatia,
yeah.
Went to Italy. Well, I think it went from Italy to California.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now, do we indeed have a John McLaughlin here? So I'm going to call an audible and ask one of our most experienced and distinguished wine tasters to taste and describe this wine. Thank you, Rick Smith.
Nailed.
All right, so
Nero d'Avola.
I'll step in.
A funny
I got to
label.
get an empty glass though. All right.
That would be good.
Fortunately, I hadn't opened this one, but it's the screw top.
Lucky for you.
Yeah.
Benefits from time though, Rick.
Yeah, I really do.
Yeah, I'll give it a full 30 seconds, Dan.
Better you than me.
Yeah. All right, so what do I see about this one? It's just looking at it, and I can't give you any of the history or the background since I didn't research it, but looking at the label, I'm reminded that it's a Sicilian wine. So we've been through several of those tonight. And it's got to be not one of the two most widely grown red grapes, probably on a somewhat lower elevation than the at least the first Sicilian wine that we tasted. So we've got it's a dark wine, and I find it sort of almost a purple garnet flavor, character of depth. And if I look around the edges, some of the ones we've had earlier are a little bit faded around the edges, and you can sort of see through them. This one has full color all the way through, as I see it. Now,
So Gretchen and I actually visited this winery in Sicily about 5 years ago.
Oh, nice.
It's way out in the west of Sicily in the Marsala region. And Gretchen can give you another.
Well, they used to produce a lot of Marsala wine, but tastes of the world have changed, and people aren't making veal Marsala and chicken Marsala as much. So they've changed their entire vineyard over to other wines, and this is one of them.
Eric, I think you should change your Audible here.
Anyway,
they actually have some knowledge.
But he's a little shy at first, so you need someone else to start talking, and then she'll pick up the ball.
Anyway, it's a great vineyard. They gave a fabulous tour, and I like some of their other wines a lot more than this. They have a really nice white wine, which you can find in state stores, but this particular one, I don't like at all.
Interesting.
So Brio, was it Brio?
This round. I find cherries in the nose, not somewhere between ripe and dried cherries.
One member of our group has a unique description of wine for this one. She said it was diesel flavor.
Yeah, really?
Diesel.
Yeah.
Could someone show us the bottle?
Kind of like dark. Yeah.
The nose is particularly strange, I think. I cannot place it.
That was it. It was the nose. The nose. It tasted diesel, like gasoline.
Very strange nose. It's almost like synthetic.
I really like this wine.
I do too.
I
usually agree with Gretchen on
but
this one, but this one I really
it's
like.
really full-bodied. To my palate, it's really round.
Yeah.
And I agree that the nose is a little peculiar.
Yeah.
But if I was eating a big red steak, this would be the wine of the ones we've had tonight that I would drink.
Well, I'm going to jump in there with Gretchen and say, having tasted it again, I recall as we did our sampling, this was the one that I would not have put in the final selection. And I find the nose and the color interesting, and I can find things about it I like. When I taste it, I find it much too astringent.
Really?
Yeah.
I find it way round. That's really interesting.
Hey, this is fun thing about doing it collaboratively and seeing who perceives different things in the wine. Yeah.
Hey, Rick, I'm with you, but I think the label has got the best art on it, except maybe for the zebra stripes.
Rick, I would tell you that this is the second time I've tasted it, and it's been open for a couple of hours. It's much better than getting the screw top off 2 minutes ago.
All right. Well, okay. So presenter's error.
Actually, that's a really important thing to say. There's a lot of these wines that are very young because they're trying to get them out. They're trying to sell them. They're trying to do what they can with them. Some of them are going to be able to hold up for a couple of or 3 or 4 more years, but whatever you do with a 2017, 2018 wine, open it up for an hour or two. You know, I hate to move to my next wine, but the next wine, the Perricone, when you put it in your glass, swirl it for about a full minute before you taste it, because the air will really help it. It's got really pretty rough tannins. And that's true, I think, of this wine and several others.
I don't taste any tannins in this wine.
Well, we've
You
had.
know, I thought the Nerello Marscalese was a wine that, while I liked it tonight, I'd like to have that age in the bottle for years, and I think it will come together in interesting ways. I'm less convinced of that about this wine.
Yeah, maybe.
But it would be interesting to see.
Yeah,
at our next reunion, can you bring us a case of 20-year-old bottles of this?
Maybe, but Planeta. Oh, I can bring you 10-year-olds, but
okay, well that's pretty good.
But you know, Planeta is the big Sicilian winemaker.
Yeah,
and they do a Etna Rosso that I really rather like a lot, but it's way more expensive than these.
Yeah,
and all the Planeta wines are, but it's just it's worth looking at the smaller vineyards in Sicily to find out where things are. You want to try shall we move on, Eric?
Yeah, let's explore Perricone.
The local name for it is Guarnaccio, and a lot of people believe that has something to do with Grenache, but I'm not sure I believe it. This is the Tenuta Regaliali vineyard. The Perricone grape, at the start of the 21st century, there were only 192 hectares of Perricone in the whole of Sicily, where in the 18th and 19th centuries, there were 32,000 hectares of the grape. Then it was used to make the important and much sought after Zucchero wine by the Duc d'Aumale, who was in reality Henri d'Orléans, the son of the then king of France, who owned 6,000 hectares near Palermo. It was almost completely wiped out by the phylloxera epidemic that swept through Europe in the last half of the 19th century. But understanding its nobility, growers are now trying to revive it. And I'm not sharing this, am I? Yeah, I am.
Can I see it?
Well, let me go this way, though. Yeah. Now trying to retrieve it and preserve its unique characteristics. Tenuta Regaliali, the estate is located high in the western mountains of Sicily. Its Perricone grapes grow at nearly 3,000 feet above sea level and are the last of all Sicilian grapes to ripen. The Perricone vines at Tenuta Regaliali were planted in 1959. From rootstock, actually they got American rootstock and transplanted the stuff on it. But the Perricone comes from a single vineyard of a little over 2.5 hectares of deep, fine clays that are slightly chalky.
Go back.
I know I am. The Tenuta Regaliali was purchased by the two original Tosca brothers in 1830, and the family began to make wine on the estate after World War II. These are two views of the vineyards high up on the mountains. The color is deep purple, black, dark cherry, blueberry on my nose. The palate is black cherry, blueberry, plum, chocolate. And Eric, I'm really interested in this. I find a lot of these Southern wines to have hints of fresh herbs in the palate. At any rate, significant, somewhat rough tannins, thus decantings recommended, with a surprisingly balanced acidity. At the finish, the wine's somewhat complex and contradictory structure, because its fruit seems to be arguing against its tannins, comes together, I think, on the palate in a surprisingly harmonious whole. Now, I should just say that this is one of the most, I've been drinking about examples of 10 or 15 different Perricones, and this isn't the best, but it's certainly not the most expensive. And I think that, to my mind, it has the best potential for aging of any wine that I've tasted from Sicily.
I can believe that, Henry. We parted company on the last wine. I really like this. This is and I like it drinking young. The fruit is so pronounced that it balances the equally strongly pronounced acids and tannins in a way that I just opened this one too, that even freshly opened with a little bit of air in the glass, I think this is a really nice wine.
Yeah, it's a wine to watch out for. It's just a name. I mean, there's so little of it grown in Italy. You saw Eric's chart earlier. It was the littlest. It had the smallest vineyards in all of Italy, but it's got one of the greatest heritages. So I think there will be more and more vineyards trying to do something with it. Although they got to be very high in the mountains. They've got to be way up.
Yeah. What are the better ones you've had?
I'm trying to think of the name, but we were given a bottle when my book was accepted by the University of Chicago Press. A friend of mine in San Francisco sent me a magnum of a Perricone that I still have the bottle down in the garage, but I can't tell you what the name of it is. But it was, I think the magnum cost him $65, which is pretty reasonable.
Wow.
And Sandy and I opened it one evening, and we don't normally drink that much wine, but we didn't think that it was possible that we shouldn't finish it. So we did.
With dinner.
With dinner. we ate with it, yeah. But there's now 13 or 14 vineyards that are doing Perricone was originally used to blend with Marsala, as Gretchen was saying.
Yeah.
And when the Marsala wine industry plummeted, and actually you can sort of, on the nose, you can sort of smell Marsala. But the, certain vineyards who are into the heritage of Sicilian wine, as I should say, Reggiali is. He's the head of the Sicilia DOC, and he's also, and just to tell you this, that winery was the Wine Enthusiast European Winery of the Year in 2019, which is kind of interesting.
For the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to put you into small breakout groups. And the assignment is essentially talk to your colleagues about the wines and calling them by the name of the grape and discussing your impressions and doing it in a little bit more intimate setting than 32 of your classmates listening in. I'll call you back in about 15 minutes and we'll move to the next section of this evening, which is the music from Ed Wells. So you don't want to miss that. We'll come there shortly, and here you go.